Yeah, yeah. I might switch back and forth. Is that okay? Will it work okay? All right, let's get started. Hope everyone had a good night's sleep because we're really going to dive into it today. Like I foreshadowed for you yesterday, today my plan is to go through with you how to build a strong human trafficking case, including how to overcome the barriers that you're likely to encounter or have shared that you encounter to build when you're trying to build that strong human trafficking case. And my goal is that by lunchtime, you've got some new tools in your toolbox, whether you're an investigator or a prosecutor or whatever role it is that you're playing at NAFTIP or in the fight against human trafficking, that you've got some new ideas and some new resources and some new tools, how to do your job more effectively, more efficiently than you were doing it yesterday. So on that note, let's get started. Also, feel free to ask questions as I go along. I'm going to cover a lot of material relatively quickly, so don't hesitate to stop me and ask questions if you've got them while we're moving through. All right, so first, the basic building blocks of your human trafficking case, right? What do you need? You've got your suspect, which once you've charged, you will be your defendant. You have your victim. Those two are pretty self-explanatory, right? The next thing you have is your narrative or your timeline. And I call it a narrative because of the importance of it actually being a story. So you're going to end up presenting your case ultimately to a fact finder, a judge. In the United States, it's a jury more often than not, almost all of the time. But here you're going to have a judge, right? And particularly in a situation with in a situation where you're dealing with a topic like human trafficking, where you know that the fact finder is not necessarily that familiar with the subject matter, the story you're telling has to make sense. The same way as if you were telling a story to a friend about what you did during the weekend. If the story doesn't make sense to that person, it's going to be very difficult for them to understand what it is you're trying to tell them, what the important parts are of your story, and to really connect with you when you're speaking. So rather than thinking of your case only in terms of the elements, checking off this box, checking off that box, you want to make sure that if you went home at the end of the day and you said to your significant other or to your friend or to your family, this is what my case is about, that you could tell the story and they would feel like they've heard a story like they could read in a book, for example, see in a movie. So that it all flows logically and it makes intuitive sense. Along those lines, you want to make sure you have a timeline. This can often be difficult to accomplish in a human trafficking case. We'll talk a little bit more about why that is and how to overcome it. But part of what makes a trafficking case make sense is that timeline. When did the trafficker and the victim encounter one another? What happened next? And how did that initial encounter become a trafficking relationship? And what's happened since then? You want to make sure you checked off all of the elements of the crime. Like I said, it's not the only thing you need to do, but you certainly need to make sure you do it. We'll typically do that through the victim initially, and then corroboration through other evidence, either documentary evidence or evidence of other witnesses, testimony of other witnesses. Deconfliction. Anyone know what deconfliction means when I use it in the context of a presentation about building a case? Okay, so in the United States, we use deconfliction to mean making sure another law enforcement agency isn't already working on what we're working on. Making sure that another law enforcement agency, whether it's the city or the town adjacent to ours, or in some cases the state adjacent to ours, isn't already investigating the trafficker that we're starting to investigate. So I know there was some discussion from this side of the room yesterday about not having a database where you can search for somebody's name or to find out what crimes they've been charged with. Is that correct? Do you have a database? Let's start there. Is there a database? Okay. Is it a NAFTIP specific? Okay. So let's say you get a tip from a hotline or a referral from a law enforcement agency, you can pull up somebody's name in this database to see if they've been prosecuted before or if your colleague is doing it. What happens if that person has been prosecuted by someone other than that?
Yes, we do that. Yes.
When you are strapped for resources, where you have too many cases and too little time, you want to make sure you're not completely accurate. And particularly with a crime like human trafficking that often involves movement through many jurisdictions, there's an increased likelihood of having a conflict, of doing double duty, working a case that somebody else is already working.
Once we find out, we just let it go.
That should be part of, I suggest that that's part of the very beginning. One of the first things you do when you get an intent should be to make sure that one of your colleagues at NAPTIP or in any of your, the surrounding agencies are not already working on that case. One of the other values of doing that deconfliction is that sometimes, in my experience, it helps you to find additional victims. That you don't realize exist. You might get a tip that a trafficker has 2 victims, let's say, in Abuja, and then by doing the deconfliction process, you realize that another agency, let's say in southern Nigeria, has already is working that same trafficker and has identified 4 victims in southern Nigeria. And now the case that you thought was only a 2-victim case is actually, a 6-victim case, a 7-victim case, and it can grow that way. And if you don't do the deconfliction, you'll end up trying it for 2 victims, and the other jurisdiction will try it with their victims. You've done twice the amount of work, and you've presented a smaller case. Whereas if you're able to identify that early on, you don't have to, there's not prosecutors or investigators spending the time doing the same thing twice, and you're also able to present to your fact finder, to your judge, a much more persuasive, significant case. Okay, and then this last here, the last bullet point there, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's really easy when you're investigating, in particular when you're investigating, but also when you're the prosecutor, a human trafficking case, to want to shy away from the things that might make your case weaker. We all want to feel like we've got a good case. And sometimes there's a willful blindness to where there's gaps in your facts or a lack of credibility for your witnesses. And it's very easy to want to ignore those things. And as an investigator, it's easy for an investigator to not want to let the prosecutor know the problems they've encountered when investigating the case, when speaking to the witnesses, when doing the legwork that they do before bringing a case to a prosecutor. But at the end of the day, we all suffer from that. So when I say the good, the bad, and the ugly, we want to know everything. We don't just want to know all the great parts about our case at the beginning. We want to, and as time goes on, as we continue our investigation, we want to know all of the bad things too. because they will come out. And if you don't do your best to make sure they come out beforehand, when you can still address them, you can still build a stronger case, you can still find ways to overcome some of the weaknesses of your case, they'll come out on the witness stand when there's not a whole lot you can do about it. And then that's where those bad and ugly facts can be really damaging to your case. Okay, so my plan to lay it out for you a little bit better right now is to sort of walk you through what I do when I get a tip. So, you know, I've gotten a referral from a law enforcement agency or from a service provider about this new possible trafficker. What am I going to do next? The first thing I'm going to do is work up the suspect, who will then ultimately become my defendant. So what I've put up here is the things that I want to know about that person right from the start. First, I want to know that person's criminal history. That brings me back to the database question again. I know we've discussed there's an AAP database that exists. There's also a broader human trafficking database in the work. What about other criminal history? Do you have a database where you can put someone's name in and it tells you all of the crimes they've been convicted of in Nigeria? You don't. So how is it that you go about finding out if somebody has been convicted of any crime previously? Here, I'm going to walk around the microphone and get some information from all of you.
At times we will receive intelligence report from NIA, NSA, so we document it. So if we have a suspect, we can search if he has criminal record, not necessarily human trafficking.
Right.
Yeah, we can, in the course of investigation, our investigators can interview him and ascertain the criminal aspect of it.
Okay. So how do you access that information? How do you access that? Right. Is it an electronic report? You use the computer to access that information? Okay. And that in the National Intelligence Agency will give you a listing of all the crimes somebody's been convicted of previously? Okay. So that's the first thing I would do. And then, I'm not sure if this is something you're able to do here. If somebody is arrested for a crime, police officers write a police report. If a police officer arrests somebody, do they write a police report? Yeah, okay. And do those police reports get maintained in a database? No. It's a physical file. Okay. When you pull up the background check from NIA, does it tell you where in Nigeria the person was convicted of a particular crime? Yeah. Right. 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 So let's say, for example, Amanda Plisner has been convicted of not human trafficking, but robbing a bank. And I was okay. So if you request from NIA all of the information about Amanda Plisner, you'll be able to learn that I was convicted of robbing a bank in Lagos. Okay, and it'll tell you it was in Lagos. Okay. Here's why I'm asking all these questions. In addition to getting the information about what the person was convicted of, obviously you get, if you pull that report and it tells you this person's been convicted of human trafficking before, well, you know that maybe that person is back at it, they're doing the same thing again. That's a pretty good sign. Now you know if the person's been convicted of money laundering, that may very well be a good sign. But one of the things that's happened, or that I find has happened because of the lack of awareness about human trafficking in the past, is it got missed. We didn't know what it was. We didn't know what human trafficking was when we saw it until quite recently. So even if you pull someone's criminal history and it doesn't have anything that looks like a human trafficking conviction, that doesn't mean they haven't been a human trafficker. That just means that whoever handled that case 5 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe even 15 years ago, didn't know what human trafficking was, and there wasn't a way to charge them with it. All that to say, get the police report for any underlying conviction that's relatively recent, and see what the person was actually doing, not just what they were convicted of. It may give you some information. For example, we've learned that there may be associations between human trafficking and drug trafficking. Perhaps there's trafficking victims who are being used to sell drugs, for example. If the person you're investigating has been convicted of selling drugs, get the report and find out, how are they doing that? How are they selling drugs? Were there other people involved? Were there other people present when that individual was arrested for selling drugs? And see if there's a nexus to human trafficking. That might give you a little bit more, or a lot more, depending on the case, information about the criminal history of the background, or the background of the person who you're investigating in your current case. Financial information. We talked about this quite a bit yesterday in terms of motivations. So I know that we received some information about the ability to, from FIU, I believe it was, to get reports about someone's financial history, someone's like financial reporting. You want to get all that information. Any information you can get about someone's finances is very important, because this is a financially motivated crime, right? So if we're wondering, if we're wondering whether somebody was involved in this and what their motivation may have been or what the outcome was, finding out as much financial information about them as we can is going to be really important. Someone gave the example yesterday that if all of a sudden there's this brand new large home that belongs to somebody who doesn't have a job, let's say, that's something we want to know. Might lead us to believe that there's suspicious activity going on, there's criminal activity going on that's allowing that person to earn money. So in knowing that that person, let's say, doesn't have a job, isn't able to care for their family, has too large of a family, may in fact be a motivator for them to engage in this kind of activity. And then finally, criminal association. In the United States, criminal street gangs have become very active participants in human trafficking. Human trafficking has become a supplement or an alternative to drug trafficking, which used to be one of the, or it still is, but used to be pretty much the primary criminal enterprise criminal street gangs were involved in. But because of the low risk, high profit model that we've spoken about quite a bit, criminal street gangs have begun to traffic humans in addition. So if somebody is involved in in the United States, it's criminal street gangs. It can also be organized crime of other types. So any presence of an organized crime relationship or association could be a sign. It's certainly information you want to know. I guess I should ask, what kind of criminal associations do you have?
Thank you. On the other side, what we see from Mexico going into the United States is you have the drug trafficking organizations involved with human trafficking. And those drug trafficking organizations in Mexico have associations with criminal street gangs in California. And they can associate and take the human trafficking from Mexico through the United States through those associations of narco trafficking and then our criminal street gangs in California.
So are there street gangs in Nigeria? Everyone know what a street gang is? I guess I should have started with that question. Go ahead.
No.
Okay. What kind of criminal associations are there here? Okay, so what is is it a religious cult? What is the basis of it? What do they share in common?
they pass through, they go through Agadez, right? So you have a gang, a network in Benin. From there, they move the victims to Kano. Their network will pick them up at Kano and then move them to Katsina through the border. It's just a network. It's not an association. It's just a network of them. And most of the time, we find out that they don't move with them.
You call them gangs?
Gang. They are just gangsters.
Okay.
They are not agents.
Agents. Okay. All right.
Agents. So they move without these victims. They only have network that. They have somebody here in Abuja here that will pick them up. And when the person picks them up, he contacts them at Kanu that this Zobos, they are coming with Zobos. And when they arrive Kanu, those people pick them up also.
All right. Do those networks, are those networks the same networks every time? Is it the same people doing the same thing over and over?
Yes. Yeah, in several occasions, we found out that they are the same network.
Okay, and what's the relationship among the people who are part of that network? Are they family? Are they friends? Did they grow up in the same neighborhood?
No, mostly they are friends.
Friends.
Most of them, they are friends.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Just recently, there's a research by French government. They find out that the cartel that runs human trafficking in Europe is AAP fraternity. Court members in the university, they have AAP fraternity there. They initiate most people that want to follow them, and their activity in school there is to suppress others. If you have a girlfriend, they come and take your girlfriend. From there, they graduate from killing people. Most of them did not graduate in the university. And what they did now is some of them went to South Africa and formed drug gangs there. Mm-hmm. And others went to Europe and formed human trafficking gang there. Mm-hmm. So what they do is the ones in Nigeria here, we pick up the girls and send to them. Already they have a house, they have a place to keep them. So the relationship there is not blood relationship like brother and sister. What is holding them together is the oath.
Right. They
have an oath that is holding them together. So them, you cannot cheat your brother will not cheat you.
Yeah.
So that is how it's.
What about here? Are those cults also here?
Yes.
Yes.
It's a cultist. The pirates, the Vikings, the Buccaneers, there are many.
Do these cults participate in different types of crime? Okay. In clubs.
Excuse me. Let me contribute.
I want to bring back in
one
for a
house.
second. Can I get everyone's attention for just a minute?
Hello. I think the issue is that they are syndicates.
Yeah, okay.
They are syndicates.
You've answered my question. So this is
network of criminals. Some people do the inducement, some people do the recruitment.
Yep.
They hand over to another set, like movement from Benin to Kano. The person that recruited in Benin will not move with them. We only send them through, even from Lagos, my 12 in Lagos, they send them to Kano. They will move.
Okay, so we've identified yet another similarity between the United States and Nigeria. Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like you're all familiar with the role that those associations. Give me just 1 second. Gentlemen, can I ask you to pause just for a second? We can continue the conversation. I just want to make sure we're doing it in a way that everybody can participate. So it sounds like you're already aware of the role that these cults play in human trafficking. So was the point that I was hoping to get to, is that as part of your very initial investigation, you want to make sure you do whatever kind of workup, whatever kind of research you need to do to find out if that person is a participant in one of those kinds of organizations, what organization it is, what role that they play. Not only is that going to tell you something about the person you're currently investigating, but it's going to tell you whether there's other people you should be investigating also, again, to build that bigger, more persuasive case that you're going to be putting in front of a judge. Right, that being said, there was a question over here that I'm going to take real quickly.
Thank you. It's not a question per se, it's just to contribute to the discourse. It's a court in Nigeria, most especially in an institution, is basically a bond of friends, and in campus, you understand. It is recently that study have to show the activities of cultists is not tailing towards human trafficking. But initially, court was not for trafficking. So it was just for suppression of other people, freedom and superiority on campus. But later, they step from being infraternity in the activities on campus to now link it to some of their friends that have graduated, and they now start bringing up to drug trafficking, then to human trafficking. Yeah, money was the motivation.
So, like other traffickers, when money is the motivator, people get into trafficking. So, yeah. So all that to say, make sure you're aware of the criminal associations that exist with regard to the particular person or group of persons that you're investigating. Right. The next big one is the victim. So a lot of people have mentioned both on Monday, and we discussed it a bit yesterday, the difficulties in having victims, ultimately getting victims to court. So all of the things that are listed here, and again, I will provide all of the slides, so don't feel like you have to furiously write down everything that is up there. You will get it in a much neater format than you're going to be able to write it right now via the internet. So all of these are items that ultimately are going to affect whether or not you have your witness available to you at court, which is our goal, right? We've talked about ways that we can build a case, that we can prosecute a case, get a conviction without our victims, but in the perfect world, if we can get our victims there, we want them. We want to pay attention to all of these things. First is stability. Is your victim stable? Our victims are coming out of really traumatic, really challenging, frightening situations. You don't walk out of a situation like that and just go about your life and get back to business and get back to school and get back to work. Takes a lot to recover from being in a trafficking situation. So we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to help stabilize our victims. I know NAPTIP does that quite a bit internally. We also want to be aware of any other needs that our victims may have that either NAPTIP can't provide or wouldn't typically provide to the victims, and make sure that we're getting them everything they need to be stabilized, not just for the case, for their own well-being, but that is something you want to know. Are they receiving services? Do they need them? And you also want to be aware if for some reason they're refusing services. That's something you would want to note and think about why that might be. Legal issues. Again, does this witness have a criminal history that is that tells you something about what kind of behavior you might expect from them? Are they going to be difficult for you to work with? Are they going to be fearful of the police? Are they going to be unlikely to cooperate with an investigator, with the prosecutor, based on what we can see just from their criminal history? Again, not necessarily determinative, doesn't tell us with absolute certainty, but something you want to know. Similarly, are there pending charges? We talked yesterday about situations where the victim becomes the trafficker. If that has resulted in the victim being charged as a trafficker, you may end up in a situation where you have both a victim and a defendant, somebody with pending criminal charges at the same time. Immigration. If your victim was here illegally, your victim was here legally, was trafficked here by somebody, you may end up with a situation where that person, well, I guess I should ask, what happens if somebody is here, is trafficked here, without having gone through immigration, without having any proper paperwork? Do people get deported? Do you get sent back to the country that you've come from? Right. Right. Okay, you've given me a perfect segue. Is there a law that allows that person to stay in the country during the course of the investigation? Yes. Because they're a victim of crime. Okay. Another similarity, we've got the same thing in the United States. So then this may be less of a problem, but still something you want to be aware of. You want to know where your victim is. Is your victim in, and that is the next one, is your victim in the city? Is your victim in the state? Is your victim in the country? Is your victim traveling outside of the city, state, or country in a way that may cause them to not come back? Is your victim in custody, for example, if they're also a criminal defendant? And in the case of children, in the United States, we have situations where the children sometimes are homeless or in the foster care system, so it makes it a bit more difficult to keep track of where they are. If children, if there's a homeless child here, will they be, and they were the victim of human trafficking, will they be in a shelter? Are all of the children who you recover put in shelters if they're homeless? Okay, so you should know where your victims are then. Again, something you might not have to worry about, but you want to know exactly what you're dealing with. Current relationship to the defendant. This is a biggie. You want to know, don't just assume that because you've recovered the victim, that because you've recovered the victim, that the relationship between the victim and the trafficker is over. Sometimes due to things like the trauma bond, the relationship that develops with the trafficker, it may not necessarily terminate when you've recovered the victim. You want to know whether the victim is likely to try and defend the trafficker or to try to protect the trafficker from, yeah?
Where the victim, we don't want you to prosecute a trafficker. So she will do everything humanly possible to defend, to shade. We have some situation where in Benin, some girls are brought, and in the process of bringing the girls and the trafficker has already given them sign. So all that's telling us is we went on our own. We traveled on our own. We are not small girl. We have the right to travel. So nobody traffic us. So situation like that happen where victims will not want you to prosecute the trafficker because of so many reasons. They've already shielded the trafficker. So if you persevere, if you continue to press them on, some of them may want to yield and agree. But even when they yield to agree to tell you the truth about the trafficker, they will not want to stand as a witness against the trafficker. They only want to, maybe because of the relationship you cultivate with them, they just give you that information that is the trafficker, but they will not stand as a witness. So whatever means you use to prosecute the trafficker is left to you.
Right, so you have two issues then. You may have victims who are protecting the trafficker, but you also have victims who are trying to protect themselves.
Yes.
So what do you do to overcome that?
Most times what you do is you have to bring the victims down, you talk to the victim, you continue to allow her to have reason why some of those injustices, some of those things that they've done to her, why it is needed for the trafficker to get convicted so that it will serve as a punishment for the trafficker and other people that want to do similar things. So you have to bring her on board for her to understand the gravity of the offense and why it is needed for the case to be prosecuted so that at least she should not just feel cheated and just want to take it like that. So at times you counsel them and bring them up in such a psyche.
Great. I'm going to share with you an example from a case I had. If somebody is in custody in a jail, or give me just 1 second, in a jail or a prison here, does that person have the right to make phone calls? Can somebody who's in jail or in prison make phone calls? In custody. Yes, suspect, yes. They use their own phone? Right. When somebody is in NAPTIP's custody, what are the conditions? How are they, where are they staying? What is it like for them? Is it a bedroom? Is it
Yes.
Are there bars?
Yes, yes, it's a bedroom. Yeah. The suspect. Yes, the suspect, yes.
Okay.
It's like a house with beds, and then it's comfortable.
Can they come and go?
No,
No.
no, they stay there, but we give them, some bit
How
of
do you make
access.
them stay there?
We keep them there, and sometimes we allow them to just go around. It's not like they are locked up in a place.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, what keeps them from leaving?
No, they can't cross the gate. We have enough security.
Okay, so
Yes.
security and there's
Yes,
a gate.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We monitor them.
So they are
No,
locked.
no, she's saying she said suspect. Yes, the suspect.
So before
For them.
trial and after trial, different places. Okay. In the United States, for the most part, it's the same. Or very similar. Okay.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Please, I'm sorry to draw you back.
No, it's okay.
In the United States, in addition to following the money, do we also follow the communication? For example, one of the pieces of devices we normally pick up when we make searches, and we pick up phones, laptops. You can actually begin to notice some pattern in communication. You can use it to actually know the friends, the links between groups. Do you do that in the United States?
We do. We'll
Because it's very
talk about that
important.
more in a few minutes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what was the last thing you said?
Yeah. So I'm saying that communication is one of the ways of establishing get information, get evidences. There was one search we did one time where we picked up the person's phone. By subjecting the phone to a kind of forensic analysis, we were able to know the kind of communication that was done
Sure.
at a certain time, point in time, and all that. So I think we should also add it in one of the suspects' information we need to establish build-up cases. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
You make a very good point. Where I was going with this line of questions that I've been asking you is in the United States, when somebody has been arrested for a crime, both before trial and also after trial, if they're in a custody, in a custodial facility in the United States, they're able to use the phone, with rare exception. Those phone calls are recorded. So, everybody knows the phone call is recorded. It's not secret recording. And then those recordings are made available to law enforcement. And in my experience, it's been a very valuable resource for learning about what's really going on with your defendant or your suspect and your victim, as opposed to what your victim may be telling you. I had a case where The victim appeared to be on board, was cooperating with law enforcement, was giving us statements, being very pleasant, very agreeable. And we requested the jail calls. That's what we called them, jail calls. We requested them from the custodial facility. We began listening to them. And it turned out that our victim was telling our defendant every bit of information we had given her. She was telling him who we were speaking to. She was telling him how far along we were in our investigation. She was telling him what records we had requested from different banks and from different social media companies. The defendant knew absolutely everything. The defendant was then picking up the phone and calling fellow gang members and telling them everything that the victim had told to him. So it turned out that our victim wasn't on board as much as we thought that she was. And it turned out okay, but that was something we were really glad to know, rather than finding out when we walked into custody, or we walked into a trial and they were blowing kisses at each other. That would have been a really tough way to find out that information, right as you're about to do your opening statement. Okay, family support. We talked a bit yesterday about the role family might play, that it's not uncommon for family members to be involved as the traffickers or to be complicit in the trafficking. If they're the traffickers, likely that you know that already, that they're not on board, they're not on your team. But even if they're not the trafficker, they're not the person you're charging, there may be other reasons that they're not supportive, that they're not supportive of the prosecution, that they're not supportive of the victim, and that's something you want to know. You want to know if when this victim is going home, if in fact that the victim is going home, whether she or he is being supported and being encouraged to come to court and encouraged to do the right thing and to cooperate, or whether that person's being deterred from doing so. Law enforcement. If your victim is anti-police, you want to know that. If your victim has had bad experiences with law enforcement, perhaps was treated unfairly by law enforcement in the past, you want to know that. And lastly, with regard to your victim, you want to make sure that when your investigators are conducting interviews of your victim, that they're taking what we call a trauma-informed, victim-centered approach. Is that familiar? Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, who is an investigator in the room? Okay, right here in the front. Shouldn't have sat in the front row. What do you do to make sure that when you're conducting an interview with the victim that you're taking a victim-centered, trauma-informed approach?
Well, you see, like in AAP, what we do is that the agency is multifaceted, and so we have counseling, we have an SOP, standard operational procedure, and so the counselors that work on the team as a case team, because once a case comes into the agency, a case team is formed, and so the investigator is there, the lawyer is there, and then the counselor is there. And so it's the responsibility of the counselor, who is trained to counsel and demobilize the victim from her trauma state, so that she is then comfortable to give evidence, to open up, and narrate the story of whatever that went on. And so that's how we do it. So it is the responsibility of the counselor, who is well trained to do that, on the case team that handles the victim, to make sure that she is comfortable or he is comfortable to give evidence.
And is that person, is the counselor present when you conduct the interview, when you're taking the evidence?
No, it's not there. Sometimes it's there. Sometimes she may not be there. If the victim is still unwilling to talk, the counselor works more on him or her, back in the shelter, so that she is made to, overcome the trauma that she went through.
So what about you specifically as an investigator? When the victim has finally agreed to meet with you, to talk to you, to tell her story or his story, and you sit down with them, what do you personally do to make sure that that victim is comfortable and that you're using it?
We avoid asking questions that will make her remember what she went through. Because as investigators, you don't ask questions that will make her remember the trauma that she went through. So you are friendly, you avoid asking direct questions. you want her to just come up, in the way she went through the trauma, and then the way she's able to narrate the story. And so you follow her up gradually and gradually. And so if it's difficult, you still refer her back to counselors so that they can continue to work on her. Because it's very important to you to allow the trauma period to be totally over so that you can then get your information that you want from the victim.
What kind of environment are you in when you're conducting your interview?
We have a separate room, an interrogation room kind of, and so she's there with you, and then you interrogate her, you find out questions, you question her, and then you lead her to come up, and let you know the information.
If I may add, depending on the victim, I know that I handled the victim 2 weeks ago. We take her to an office where she feels comfortable. So depending on her case, the sensitivity, so she can feel free to talk. So I know I interviewed a victim in my office. One day I said, oh, we're just here to chat. And then you let her tell her story. Then from time to time, maybe you want some particular info. Oh, okay, how did you say this happened? In a very friendly environment. So depending on the victim, there's no hard and fast rule of where she's being interviewed. Yeah.
Great. I asked that question because one of the things that's becoming really popular in the United States, it's considered to be one of our best practices, is using what we call a soft room. Is that term familiar to anyone? Okay, so what we call a soft room is a room specifically used for interviewing trafficking victims. And rather than looking like a regular interrogation room, it's set up more like the living room of your house. So it has a nice rug on the floor, and there's a couch, there's some nice fluffy pillows. If we know that there's going to be a child, there'll be some stuffed animals in a basket. The lighting is different. Some dimmed, warm lighting, things like that. So that's one additional piece that you might consider making available, because every little bit helps. Yes?
I would like to add that regarding victims, for us, before we take them to court, if there's pre-trial, there's need for privacy. You don't do it when the office is filled, they might not come around. So we always take them to the interview room or to a separate office where you'll be there with them, and it might take time, but you try to be friendly and have their confidence. With that, you play around. Sometimes I even go as far as, have you eaten? Are you hungry? Would you want to eat with me? Okay, can you have this drink? Try to, be friendly with them. And if you're there with them alone, they can go a long way to tell you everything. So.
That's one of the things I always suggest personally to myself. If I'm hungry, I'm in bad mood. Probably the way a lot of you feel by the time you get to lunch time when we're here. In a bad mood, I don't feel like talking, very easy to take something the wrong way. For even years. And on top of that, you're thirsty, you haven't had a decent meal in months, years maybe, you haven't slept, you haven't felt safe, and now somebody's coming at you asking questions. So I always suggest doing exactly what you said. Get someone fed, give somebody, drinks, let them relax, feel safe for the first time in probably a very long time. And that, in addition to being in the victim's best interest, which is what we always want to worry about first, will go a long way for your interview. So, great idea. So, we jumped the gun on this slide just a bit, but trauma-informed practicing, you want to talk to your victim about people and places and times to build that narrative that I talked about at the beginning. And then you want to go from broad to narrow. And you touched on that a bit. You want to just let them speak. Let them tell you the story. And then ask the more specific questions, little by little, as the time goes on. And maybe you don't even ask the first time they tell the story. Maybe the first time that they tell you their story, you just listen and think. and you let them feel heard. And then the next time you meet, you say, you know, I was giving some thought to what we talked about the last time. I was wondering if you could clarify for me this. Keeps from overwhelming the victim. Okay, so in addition to the victim statements, what other kind of evidence do you collect when you're investigating a human trafficking case? What kind of, other than taking a statement from a victim, give me other pieces of evidence you collect when you're investigating a case.
Well, for instance, we look at the age. You know, if she's a minor, we know that it's obvious that it's likely going to be a trafficking victim.
But not the facts. What's the evidence? So how do you know that?
Or the evidence?
Yeah. What kind of evidence are you looking for?
Well, we often refer to what our law says, the act, the means, and the purpose.
Right.
And so evidence actually comes from whether there's recruitment. Was there any recruitment in the first place?
So how do you prove that?
Whether there's recruitment. Of course, if somebody's moved from a location,
right,
you know, to another location.
How do you know that, though? How do you know whether?
Of course, the victim is rescued.
Right. So the victim statement, right?
Yes,
so that's one type of evidence.
Very well. From the statement.
What are other types? How else could you show that same fact?
Huh? The transportation. Transportation is also.
Other than the victim statement.
Yes.
How else could you show that they were moved, that they were recruited, or that they were transported? Is there anything else you could do? Let's say your victim wasn't available. How else would you get that same information? How else would you explain to a judge?
Well, from transportation, from the phones, you can get information.
Okay, so phones.
Yes.
Like your colleague over here was saying, forensic analysis of your phone.
Yes, yes.
That could be what we call corroborating evidence, right?
Exactly,
It
exactly.
supports the victim statement.
Sure.
All right,
Manifest of travels.
Pardon?
Travel manifest.
Travel manifest.
Yes.
That's another good one.
Yes.
Yeah, I was saying the community where she lives, you know, you just do some little background check information. Where did you? Yeah, you ask them.
Okay, great. What else? What other kinds of evidence can you use? Give me a second. We can't hear you.
Some other evidence that we look at is the moment is a victim that is taken out of the shore of Nigeria. You know, the passport is an evidence. Then the flight ticket is an evidence. Yeah, the flight ticket. So those are other things that we had to show and to prove that this girl actually left the shore of Nigeria to that country.
Flight manifest or passport. Anything else? Any other evidence you might use to
Yes,
prove the act
please.
and the means or the?
Like pictures, then telephone numbers. In the course of our conversation, sometimes they have numbers of these traffickers and stuff like that. So pictures, videos, sometimes they use their phones to record videos. I've personally had that, if they are fortunate to come back with their phones. So
In addition, some don't go through flight.
Right.
Some go through the land borders. And you have some features for knowing them. Like people who pass through Kano, they have some items they have to purchase in order to cross the Sahara Desert. You have a keg that is covered with a veil. You buy foodstuffs. You have water. You must have some things to sustain yourself in this desert. Those things can still be part of the things to show as evidence.
So how would you show that in court?
If some of the victims that are rescued, because along the line at times when they are traveling, they have been intercepted in Niger, maybe in Agadez, or some go through Mali at the airport at times, or in the parks. So, and they will have purchased those things meant for them to hold to cross the Sahara Desert.
So you recover them from the
recover
victim when
them
you
from
recover
them,
the victim.
yeah.
Okay. Anybody else have something they want to add?
Some of the victims also hold the currencies of the locations that they have been. So you can also use that as to know where she or he has passed through.
All right. So has their passport. Yeah. Oh, so those are all, everything that everybody has just contributed is what, like I said, we call corroborating evidence. It's evidence that's going to help confirm everything your victim is telling you, which is important for you. You want to know you want to know the facts. You've got to discover what happened, but it's also important for court, because one of the things that I'm sure you have all experienced, and we certainly do in the United States, is that sometimes there's a long time between investigation and trial, and you may get a victim who, by the time trial comes, doesn't remember quite as clearly anymore. Or you'll have a situation where perhaps the victim has a criminal history, so maybe she's not so, or he is not as believable as you would like your victim to be. And a defense attorney can say, you know, if you have a victim who, let's say, has been convicted of stealing before, you may have a defense attorney who says, well, you're telling the truth? And the victim says, yes. And he says, well, were you telling the truth when you stole? Is that something that somebody who's an honest person would do? And now all of a sudden, the credibility, the honesty of your victim is being called into question. So one of the ways to help remedy that problem is to show you don't have to believe the victim. Even if you think the victim is telling non-truths, these other things show that she is, because they show the same story that she told you or that he told you. So that corroborating evidence, particularly in a situation where you have a difficult victim, can be really important. Okay, so, all right, corroborating witnesses. Like mentioned over here, so other people in the community, neighbors, reporters, or whoever it is that reported the trafficking in the first place might be a good person to corroborate the story. Maybe that person saw the same thing the victim experienced. Neighbors, families, school staff. In the United States, it can often be people who work in the school who will identify a minor or a child who's acting in a way that might be indicative of trafficking, or shares things with a teacher or a counselor or another student that show that. And in the case of labor trafficking, often we'll have employees. For example, if you have a sex trafficking case and the trafficking is taking place at a hotel, we'd want to know whether the clerk at the hotel has seen anything. Have there been any indicators that the trafficking was taking place? Let's use that as an example. Let's say you're working a sex trafficking case and you know that the trafficking was taking place at a hotel, and you went to talk to the clerk. What kind of questions would you want to ask the clerk to find out whether they had any information for you about your case? Who's an investigator? Back corner? All right, you've shown yourself. Here's bringing you the mic. Oh.
Okay, you're asking of kind of information you can elicit from.
Yeah, I'm an investigator. I'm working a sex trafficking case, and I know it took place at Hotel A. So I say, wonder if anyone who works at Hotel A has seen anything unusual going on that might help my case. So the person who works at the reception desk at the hotel, you ask to interview them because you want to know what they've seen or if they've seen anything. Okay. What would you ask them to find out whether they have information for you that might corroborate your victim's statement?
Primarily, I'll find out the age of girls in the brothel. And then,
how would the hotel clerk know that?
They will know. Looking at the ages, looking at the victim, looking at someone, you'll be able to know what age. Looking at someone, you'll be able to know what age.
Okay.
Yes, age.
So what did the person look like that?
Yes, what does the person look like? Yes. And then I'll also find out who brought the person, and then how the person was brought, and the regularity of how often does he receive visitors, like the person coming to collect wages on his or her behalf, and some other questions related.
Okay. Anybody else?
I think basically when you see the influx of girls in that place, or even men who patronize the sex workers, is enough indicator for you. The influx at the magnitude of men that are going in and out of that place.
And can I add? You might not go physically to face them one-on-one. You might go on surveillance. You might go undercover to observe the activities in the hotel. That will give you a lead to know what you want to ask them when you come forward to ask them the questions.
Very good. So surveillance?
Yes. What I mean by that is that you want surveillance on the hotel. You might even enter, mix up with the staff of the hotel, mix up with the people.
Undercover.
Undercover.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Majorly, part of the laws that set up hotels in Nigeria, it's always very difficult for the clerk of the hotel to give information, especially when you are a stranger. So, but for you to get viable information from the clerk, first, apart from using the instrument of surveillance and undercover, you can equally create a friendship with the clerk. Let him be comfortable with you. So from there, then you now take it a little bit further. But if you are just one off spot that you just want to go to him and seek information, it's most likely that the clerk will not give you. So it's either you run an undercover to be able to unearth what is happening in the hotel, or you do a surveillance, or you disguise as somebody that wants to stay. Oh, yes. So that you'll be able to get an insight in what is happening in the hotel. But ordinarily, just going and getting, it may not be easy. It may not be easy.
So here's another question. I first asked, what if you went to interview the clerk, what would you ask the clerk? Is there any other evidence you could get from that hotel?
You could also ask if there's a CCTV recording.
Anybody else?
You could ask the kind of people who checked in and if they were accompanied by either the girls or, and probably you want to establish a timeline.
Okay, so I like where you're going. Other than asking, what else could you do to get that information at the hotel?
Other than asking?
Yeah. Is there anything else you could do other than just an interview to find out who checked in and when they checked in?
Records, checking records.
Hold that thought.
Most times it's surveillance or undercover, because the hotel will not want to cooperate with you and give you such information. Yes. They won't give it to you. It's their private business. Yes. They will not give it to you. Except you get a court order to do that. But before court order, you can't do that. You can't access their data.
Hello?
Except that.
Comes up, you can use those informants to penetrate the hotel and give information, extract information from them, and then pass it to you. Yes. You can. You can.
Yeah. So let's say you get a hotel. Your victim tells you, I was in Abuja on this day, and I stayed at this hotel, and I was in Lagos on the next day, and I stayed at this hotel, and you can get those records. Now all of a sudden, you're not relying on the victim to tell you in court where she was and when she was there, because you have papers who do it for you, right? Did you have a question?
such an information. I give an instance in Kano Command. What we did, because we understand some of the nature of this hotelier, is to protect their customer so that they continue to patronize them. Yep. So now to get this information, what we did was to carry them along. We carried the proprietors, the owner of the hotel along, and enlighten them on the issues of human trafficking. So they now had to be they now cooperated with us as an ambassador. So anytime there's a minor that comes to anybody that brings a minor, what they do is to call us. So they now became a partner, having known the scourge of human trafficking and giving them the necessary lectures and the understanding of it. So they cooperate with us. So until you have such cooperation, until you have such understanding with them, they will not give you information easily.
So I want to ask a little bit of a question on a little bit of a different topic, but related. Has anybody ever considered or successfully charged a hotel owner with helping with facilitating human trafficking? Yes.
Yes, I want to say that the previous act that we had, 2003, 2005, had brothel keeping as an offense. But the 2015 Act does not have it. But the 2003-2005 Act, we've had to charge suspects as in owners of hotels for brothel keeping. In fact, we had to seal up 2 brothels at a time in 2008. We had to even attach the 3rd one in the course of the proceeding, but there were a lot of other legal issues that made us not to succeed further in that. But then because brothel keeping was specifically outlawed in that law, that was where we were able to charge them. But now, you may not be able to charge on brothel keeping for the purpose of brothel keeping because they have the legal permission to run a hotel, may not be as a brothel. But what we now do is that when you have an established case that the manager has a hand, has a hand in the recruitment, because sometimes they work together. I once handled a case where the manager is in good relationship with the person, yes, profiting from the crime.
Right.
Yes. Then when the men come in and meet the girls, they pay the madam that brings the girls in, and then the madam settles the manager. But when it is a question of, oh, I'm a prostitute, I come in, I prostitute, and I pay you the hotel rate, the cost of prostituting, then it's on its own. So on the strength of brothel keeping, they were charged then. But currently we don't charge for brothel keeping because it's not outlawed. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Once there's a minor in that hotel, I have a case I handled in Lugbe. Once there's a minor, we charged because the hotelier kept an underage in that hotel. And no, the person was not benefiting, the manager was not benefiting. The actual thing we were charging is that the owner of the hotel had to keep this person underage and did not report.
Can be forfeited. Right. If it's a car or anything that is used, if any of your property is used for trafficking, we can seize that property. If it is established, you can seize it.
Do you have to know that your property is being used for that purpose?
If you don't know, ignorance of the law does not make you. Yeah, it's not an excuse. It's not an excuse. And NAPTI has tried to even sensitize the hotels and give them information on what this law is and what trafficking is. So if you pretend that you don't know, because anybody can pretend. If your car is even used for transportation, it is seized.
But what if you loaned me your car? I said, can I borrow your car to go to the grocery store, the market? You gave me your car and I went and I trafficked people with it.
It's an exhibit. It's an exhibit and it could be
The person can be used for a prosecuting witness. The person, if assuming I own a house and then there's a crime, maybe human trafficking activities going on in my house, and I'm not aware that something like that is going on. If eventually the crime is busted and people are arrested, and me, the owner of the property, is also arrested, I can be used for prosecuting witness. You have to defend yourself that you are not part of it.
Yes.
That's not the position of the law. When you talk about prosecuting witness, it has to be someone that is aware of what is happening. It's not someone that is feigning ignorance. It's someone that is aware. You can now use them as a prosecuting witness. That can help to actualize conviction. You don't see someone that is ignorant of a particular crime that is going on. I just want to clarify that.
Thank you. Okay, let me get back to a little bit more of what I was hoping to speak about, so that make sure to cover everything at least a little bit. Okay, so just going to run through this really quickly since we did talk a bit about it already. If you're interviewing a witness, if it's a neighbor or if it's a clerk or if it's the person who called the police and gave the tip, these are some things you might want to talk to that person about. You want to know what their relationship is to the trafficker and or to the victim. Is the relationship simply, I worked at the front desk of the hotel when that person walked by? Is the relationship, I'm the neighbor and I've lived in that house for 10 years? And I've known the victim for all 10 of those years? You want to know how close or how distant the relationship is between the person who you're interviewing and the victim or the trafficker. You want to know what they saw and what they saw and heard, and when. And you want to know what the context is for what they saw and heard. If it's the hotel clerk and he saw the trafficker outside, was it in daylight when he had an unobstructed view out a very clean big window? Or was it nighttime with no street lights and he sits at a desk behind a wall? That's going to be important when it comes to his credibility if you're calling that witness to court. And then lastly, bias identification. And that'll often come along with the relationship to the trafficker or the victim, but you want to consider things that will impact whether the judge believes your witness. So does that individual, like someone said, the hotel clerk, is interested in their profit, perhaps? They're motivated to lie, maybe, to say, no, there was no trafficker there, because that's in their best interest. So that might be a bias that witness has. So you want to make sure you think about the different things that will impact the information the person's giving you and the way that they'll behave on the stand, whether it's a good, a bias in your favor, someone who is likely to be criticized for being too helpful, or a bias not in your favor, someone who's likely to get on the stand or to give an interview that might mislead you because they're biased toward the trafficker. Other corroborating witnesses could be other law enforcement agencies. Let's say in a case where NAPTIP gets a referral from a local law enforcement agency, a local police force. You want to know, what did that police officer see or hear before they sent the case to NAPTIP? Financial or other intelligence analysts, somebody who, for example, looks at a phone, does a forensic analysis on the phone, and can tell you, yes, that victim who testified or who stated that they were in communication with the trafficker every day was in communication with the trafficker every day, because I can see that on the phone. That person can come to court and testify and support the testimony of your victim. And then similar, some other government agencies who may have a more civil or an administrative role, something like Border Patrol, who might have also observed comings and goings of the trafficker. Any questions about any of these things? I know I'm starting to move a bit more quickly.
Whether the victim has the victim relationship with the law. How do you establish that this victim, how do you establish the relationship between the victim and the law? That's the police.
Sure. How did the victim feel about law enforcement?
Yeah. How do you establish that?
One of the things I'll look at is, does that victim have any criminal history? Have they even had any contact with the police, right? That's a good place to start. If I know my victim has been prosecuted, been investigated by the police and prosecuted multiple times for a variety of things, that might be an indicator to me that this person is not going to feel friendly towards the police, because in the past, it's been a negative relationship. I would also want to know about their family. You know, do you have a victim whose parent has been convicted of a crime, and as a result, they are in a shelter, or as a result, they're home with only one parent because the second parent has been in a cell someplace for a number of years. So those are some things I would want to look at. Sometimes it'll be a sense that you get from sitting in the room with someone, you know, that they don't want to talk to anybody in law enforcement. Gosh, what else do I do to identify? Sometimes they come out and tell you.
Because the counselors have built that trust around them, and most times victims are because of what they've gone through, and and the training that the counselors have. It's very, when they get to trust one person, it's only when that person is in the room that they speak.
And also keep in mind that that victim's probably been told never to talk to law enforcement.
Yes, I know, because they've gone through a lot over there. Any uniformed person they see, or they know that you are an investigator, they seem to resist anything like that.
Right.
So, but if they have a counselor, I'm just thinking now how to get information from victim. Sometimes it's important, which we have advised, we've discussed in forums on that caregiving, that you allow the counselor, especially if it's a minor, to be around the victim when you're interrogating. You seem to get, because if you look at, sometimes you ask her a question, she will turn and look at the counselor. Should I speak or shouldn't I speak? So to have more confidence in speaking when the counselor is there, than just being alone with the investigator. In some cases, not in all cases, and it's advised that in some cases you should use a counselor around when you're interrogating.
When you first meet a victim, do you directly tell them they're not in trouble?
No, that's one of the things you tell them, that NAPTIP is your friend. NAPTIP is here to help you.
You tell them they're not being investigated for a crime.
You give them, oh yeah, you're not being prosecuted for a crime, but you know it takes time. It takes time. Some of them have already, they are so bonded before they open up. It's a lot of but the counselors do a lot,
right?
And sometimes it takes one counselor they get used to and they get attached to, and that's the person they will speak to,
right?
And they'll speak when the person is there.
Is there anything? Well, I want to ask a quick question. Maybe you can address that and then move on to what it is you were going to share. Is there anything anybody else does to determine whether the victim that they're speaking to feels uncomfortable with law enforcement? Anything else you look for? Any other research you might conduct to determine whether you have a victim who might not cooperate with law enforcement? No? Okay. Go ahead.
Well, I'm not trying to respond to your question. I wanted to make an addition to what she was trying to say. In NAPTIP, we operate case teams, like I said before. And there's no barrier as to what time a counselor, for instance, can elicit information from the victim. In fact, it is advised that as long as the counselor is with the victim in the shelter, she can, once in a while, interview the victim, and some of the information we want to get, she can come back and share with us because she is already a member of the case team. And so what we are doing is in totality. There's no distinction. The lawyer is there trying to strengthen, the legal elements, that are gathered. The investigator is there letting the lawyer and the counselor know what he found out in the field. And so, I mean, that's how we operate. So there's no question of a victim not talking because a counselor is not there, this and that. They are already in a case team. So it's a seamless work that they do.
something else to keep in mind about that in terms of distinctions between counselor and law enforcement is that for the United States example, victims will look at myself or look at my law enforcement partners, and to them, we're the government. So if you have somebody who's had bad experience, not necessarily with law enforcement, but with the government, they think that the government doesn't do right by them. They think that the government is corrupt. They think that the government is biased against them. They sort of lump everyone together. And so that's a problem you can face also. Yeah. And in that way, sometimes the counselor spending alone time with the victim can be really helpful because the victim will recognize the difference between the government and the counselor who's only there for them and isn't part of the government, whose job isn't to make sure they get a statement and take the case to court and arrest the suspect, but whose job it is to just pay attention to them and just talk to them and just meet their needs. So that can elicit a really different kind of feeling for the victim.
Yes, just in addition to that, this strategy we applied in Lagos Zone once, and it worked in the course of trying to get victims to talk. Because usually, those ones that are intercepted, like we established earlier, they have a tendency of resisting because they are doctored, they are given the orientation to see law enforcement as their enemies and of course enemies of their progress. So what we did once was when we're trying to get it from them and it wasn't forthcoming, fortunately we had some victims who were with us who had just returned from a similar situation, and it was a particular trafficker that trafficked them that is also trying to traffic these other ones. So what we did was to get the other victims to come and share their story exactly with them, just one of them, and then because it's from the statements we took, from the initial statements, we were able to trace that it was the same person that trafficked them that was also that also trafficked the other person. And then when they came and shared the whole story of the experiences, in fact, it was a very bad one because the madam over there will call the family members of that particular victim on the phone and then use gun and surrender the girl with arms and tell the girl that, look, tell them you're feeling okay, tell them that you are very fine, tell them you've just eaten now. And so when the girl ended up narrating the stories to these other ones who were intercepted, that okay, that we were there, this is what we saw, the journey just started like this, they now understood what we were trying to say, and then they saw that we were trying to help them rather than harm them. So that approach worked for us in that, using a victim to explain.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That was something I was going to add another suggestion. If the victim tells you the trafficker has told them something about law enforcement, that's a good sign that they're not going to be friendly to law enforcement. And also, if you can figure out how the victim's family feels about law enforcement, or how the victim's friends, the community the person comes from feels about law enforcement, that might help you. If the victim is going, those are things that will be adopted by the victim over time, or maybe just immediately. So I don't know, are there certain communities, certain areas where people are more likely to not like the government or to not like law enforcement? Certain cultures, certain tribes, things like that? No? Okay. Oh, coffee break. Okay. Sure. Real quick so that we don't keep everyone from their coffee break.
I just want to ask a question, please. I want to understand from the American point of view of a suspected trafficker, because in our own law, a suspect is presumably innocent until proven guilty. So, from your own stand, is it equally, because I know some country take a suspect to be innocent until you prove guilty, but some believe that they are guilty of the offense, so the trafficker have to prove his innocence. So I don't know, in your own way, because we have cases in Nigeria where you hold a trafficker and he knows that he's innocent by the law. So he tried to prove difficult, he tried to frustrate you, and in the process of trying to make him calm down and get some information from him, he knows that if you violate part of his fundamental human right, when he gets to court, you know that the judge will set aside the trafficking case and now bring it to what we call trial within trial and take his fundamental human rights first. So, do you have similar problem in the United States?
Not only similar, but exactly the same. In the United States, the concept, the philosophy that you're innocent until proven guilty is very, very, very important. Our Constitution provides a number of rights that apply when you're going through the criminal justice system. And if you violate those rights, depending on the exact nature of the violation, it can result in your evidence being tossed out of court. It can result in your case getting dismissed so that the trafficker is free to go. So yeah, we do have that. There was some discussion yesterday about at what point do you arrest someone. We can't just hold somebody while we investigate the case unless we have probable cause. We have a certain amount of evidence that we've already built. If we arrest someone and hold them before that, we'll be violating their constitutional rights, and we'll end up with the exact type of problem that you're discussing, that you're mentioning. So it's slightly different in the sense that we don't have somebody in custody unless we know they're guilty, unless we've already built up some evidence. But yes, ultimately, if the person is presumed, even after they've been arrested, because we have evidence, they're presumed innocent until they're proven guilty. And that's, the court will put that first and foremost.
And that's why it's important, if you can, to get as many charges against the individual. Even if you don't have human trafficking, and you may have someone confident that can say, you can't prove human trafficking against me beyond a reasonable doubt, but you can say, but we can prove some other crime as well. And that's going to give him pause as well, knowing that you have other criminal charges or maybe administrative charges that you can bring forth against a human trafficker, and use as many of those tools available to you to assist you. And because you're right, if all you have is one charge and that charge can't be sustained, then you'll get the exact situation that you're talking about, sir.
Oh, you want to set record straight. What he said, sorry, is not the position of the law, where you say fundamental rights issues, where there are fundamental rights issues that the judge will have to set aside the human trafficking case. That is not it. In Nigeria is you're proven you're innocent or proven guilty, and it is he who attacks that must prove.
In the hallway, and the coffee break is how long? 15 minutes. Okay, and we'll come back here and finish up after coffee.
What we will do, because we're a little bit running behind, we didn't start on time, directly on 9 o'clock. What we are going to do is just take your coffee and come back in so that we'll continue the session, so that she will finish up her presentation. Please, just take your coffee and come in. Okay, we'll go ahead with this session now, even as we're having our coffee, so that we can meet up with time.
All right, so I'm going to move from talking about corroborating witnesses to talking about corroborating evidence. So, what other, from corroborating witnesses to other corroborating evidence. So, other than people's statements, other than people's testimony, what evidence do we have to support our case and corroborate our victim's testimony? So, one of the things that we talked about already that somebody mentioned was Scourge, forensic analysis at Scourge. This was, can everyone read what's on the side here, this image? Yeah, you can read it. Okay, so this turns out to be communication between the victim and the trafficker in one of my cases, where he sends her a text message asking her, what's going on, how's it going? And she responds, I just finished. Another one now. And he says, okay, do your thing, baby. And then she, follows up, provides more information about the other one for 70. That's $70 US. And then she comes back again and says, okay, just finished, about to hop in the shower. And he asks how much you got. And she says, 180 for now. He's inquiring, how much money has she earned? Because when she gets a certain amount of money, he comes and picks it up. So that she doesn't get robbed or that she doesn't squander money, right? So then he says, okay, I'm coming up. And she says, I'm hungry. And then, what you don't see here because I don't have the timestamps, is when she says, hey, I'm hungry, no response. So the next thing is him saying, this is shorthand for what are you doing? And then she says, getting money. What are you doing? And then the conversation continues, and she again says, now she's got another $70. He again follows up with her, how you doing? So right here, I have it. So this individual was a minor. So all I have to show to prove that I've got human trafficking is that she was picked, that somebody was receiving money for from Commercial Sex Act that she was picked. So I've got it literally in one screenshot from one phone, from one text message conversation. I for just about my entire case. Also, social media. When you're investigating a case, you go onto Facebook to see if your trafficker has a Facebook page or if the victim has a Facebook page. Okay, do that usually end up being pretty helpful. Done. Okay, so this will resonate with you then. So this again, same trafficker that I talked about yesterday, got some rates, which is a rate is $100,000. I'm sorry, is $1,000. And he says, done with these streets, starting my job tomorrow, time to get out of the game before it's too late. Never thought I would get a 9-to-5 job, but I'm not going back to jail. So if ever you needed evidence that somebody knows what they're doing is illegal, it's them saying they're not doing it anymore because they don't want to go to jail. So right there, have essentially an admission by the defendant. This is another picture that came off his Facebook page. Features him. This is one of our minor victims. Her face is blocked out because we protect the confidentiality of the victim. And he's holding in her face $100 bills that she earned having inside. Go ahead. So he just about puts it all together for me. I can put this in front of the jury and say, well, I have a trafficker, I have the victim, and I have the money. What do you think he's trying to say as I show it to people? And it really speaks for itself. Paper trail. Okay, before I get to paper trail, I want to talk a little bit about that. So there was some discussion yesterday about bank records, about being able to get records from the bank, request records from the bank. What mechanism, what tool do you use to request records from the bank? If you can everyone hear me okay? Without the microphone? Yeah? Okay. So maybe if you're doing an investigation and you decide, I want to see if this defendant has a bank account, I want to know how much money he's making.
order that enables you to from the bank.
Okay, and what do you call the request?
Banker's order, yes.
Order. Okay.
Exactly.
So is there something similar that you can use to request other records from other types of companies? Yes. What are those?
If we want to get financial records, like telephone, we apply to NIA, NSO's office, you know, where the whole data is analyzed. We give the phone numbers and they analyze, just like you're saying, and all those information that we want are made available to us after the analysis.
Do you ever request records from Facebook?
Yes.
You do. How do you do that?
Open source. For instance, you could, if you check and you see the person on the Facebook, you could key in to be a friend, you know, and then you get to engage the person, and then you are able to access the data.
What if their Facebook is private, so that you can't or you request to be their friend and they don't accept you? How do you get the information?
We can resort to NSS office, where they have a license to get information on the network.
So they'll contact Facebook, and Facebook sends them the records, and then they give them to you.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Rise directly to communication companies. Yes, Etisalat, MTN, and the rest of them, and then they give us that call log, all the contacts, all the every call that the person has made. We specify from so and so period to so and so period, and it's been quite helpful.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. So sorry, I didn't see you guys over there.
Sometimes it depends on what you're really asking for. They could ask you to go to court and get a court order before they give you those records.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, and if it's in court, there are two types of subpoena. Subpoena a testificandum and subpoena duces tactum. That's to produce a document or to come and testify.
Okay, right. So subpoena duces tecum. What other things, other than what we've heard, what other kinds of documents would you use a subpoena duces tecum to request? We covered, we have phone records, we have bank records, we have Facebook. Is there anything else that you would want when you're building your human trafficking case?
Okay, like records from the hotel.
Okay, right. Financial transaction, travel documents. Okay, great. Anything else, anything we've missed?
A medical report, especially when it has to do with rape cases, we need medical report to do that. Yes. Yes.
So these are, we've essentially covered them. These are, for me, the main ones. That should have been on that list. That's a really good addition. And then any background information that you have on the defendant, things like prior convictions. That's an example for us. If a defendant has a prior conviction, we can use that information. We'll have to use what we call certified documents. So it's a document that the court has said is official and that we can introduce. And then, right, tips and reports. Tips and reports, if a child disappears from a home, from an orphanage, is there a hotline that you call to report a child missing? How does law enforcement know if a child goes missing?
We report it usually to the law enforcement after 48 hours.
So just the same law enforcement number that you were reporting every time?
Yeah, you go to the police and make the nearest police station around here and make a report. The missing person is reported.
With it, did the police then give that information to someone else who only handles missing children? Or is it just the police?
It's the police. They open a file and they start building the evidence they have and start asking you questions. Then they open a file and they start looking for the child.
Sure.
Yes, there is. The police has the police record of missing persons reported, so they collate all of them from different areas of this. Yes. Yeah.
Yes, I was going to say, in addition to the, the police, they have a general, line you can call in, but then it depends on the nature of the case. They can now forward the details of that case if they feel it's a trafficking case to NAPTIP or any other law enforcement agency they feel should handle that situation.
Okay, thank you. If you get phone analysis done, do you also request the phone records through a subpoena ducis tecum from the phone company? Call records shows who the trafficker is called or when. You request those documents? Okay. So when you're looking at those documents, what are you looking for? What are you hoping that you'll see when you look in at those documents?
Phones are very important because it enables you to determine communication between, for example, the suspect and accomplices, for example. You can actually establish timelines you need to build up your case. And most importantly, it enables you to get the location through GPS of an accomplice who is probably in Libya or anywhere else, and all that. So you can apply to the communication networks, and then they provide this information with, of course, a court order, for example.
So one of the things you mentioned was using those records to establish a timeline.
Timelines, accomplices, maybe friends, conversations with friends and other criminal networks, for example.
Okay, right.
And their location, for example, their location. Because with GPS enables you to know the location of the person, either in Cameroon or Ghana or wherever else.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's take it piece by piece so we can make sure we're identifying all of the different ways that the phone records can be helpful. So like you said, can show a timeline. So we can look at the phone records and we can see what time
in October, area.
Right, of all the communications, yes. Right? So we can see maybe what was the first time the trafficker and the victim communicated, yes. Right? How long did they communicate for? What kind of communication did they have while the trafficking relationship existed? Okay, so that's one great way. What about looking at who the trafficker calls and how often they call different people? Right? You can look, you can say, who does the trafficker call most often? What phone number? Right? And then you take that phone number and you find out who that belongs to. Why are they talking so much? What else might you want to know about those calls? Maybe you want to look at how long each of the calls are. Does it look like they're long calls where maybe it's a conversation, it's a family member, it's a catching up on lost time, or is it really short calls that are transactional in nature? I've got the girl, I'm at the border, I've got the money. So the length of the calls can also be important. You can take the phone numbers, like we said, and we work the names and maybe create, as you were suggesting, that network and get some more information about how somebody was moving or who else was involved in the operation. When you mentioned GPS.
Yeah, GPS.
Okay, so are you referring to the ability of a phone company to see where somebody is based on where their phone is?
With your smartphones, there's an inbuilt GPS there that gives you the location. For example, if I have a smartphone here,
right?
It will say, for example, I'm in Sheraton, we'll say Abuja.
Right. Okay, so one of the other things that can be really important about that is not only
say 27 Lokoja Street. Sometimes the addresses may not be right, but it will give you the neighborhood. Sometimes it will say this estate, and then but it won't give you the conversation.
So that'll tell you, what are you looking for when you're doing that? You're looking to see where the traffic
Yes, we are trying to trace who are involved, what the times they call. By the time you see someone calling at 12 midnight or 1 a.m., you can discern the kind of relationship between the two parties. And then who the person calls most regularly, who is likely to be his ally and all
when
that.
you're saying the person, are you reviewing this information for the trafficker's phone records?
You don't have to do that. It's for your own investigation purposes.
Sure, but whose records are you looking at? Which?
Traffickers, yes.
Okay, so you're looking at the traffickers'
You are
records.
looking at the traffickers.
You look at the victim's records.
You can also look at the victims.
Okay,
yes.
so one of the interesting things I find that it can be really persuasive is if you line up the trafficker's records and the victim's records using that GPS information, and surely you find out that they were in the same place at the same time. Right? On this date, on this time, they were together, and then on this date again, they were together, and suddenly, everywhere the victim is moved to, the trafficker is moving also. And you can see that from those phone records. It can be really helpful. And sure.
I got a quick question since we're talking about looking at the phone records, because that's obviously super valuable when you're determining people's locations. When we were talking earlier, and when we were talking about the hotels, do you guys, so in the U.S., girls accept payment, it can be cash, it can be a number of different things, but they also accept credit cards from time to time. Do the girls here accept payment with credit cards at all? Transfer?
Using from a bank to a bank, or do you use a Venmo or PayPal?
Like Venmo? Cell phones? Okay, so yeah, so they do that in the U.S. But the other thing they have, we have it's called Square, where you plug into your phone. It's a credit card reader that you can swipe a credit card on your phone. And it just got me thinking, because we'll subpoena the records for a girl's phone for Square on the payments, and they'll provide you GPS coordinates for where those cards were swiped, so you can put them in hotels at various. Just another way of corroborating their story in terms of where they've been located.
You know what else is interesting, actually, as far as being able to corroborate? There's a lot of applications that you wouldn't think can you provide you that information that can. Like Spotify, familiar with Spotify? Yeah, so Spotify is a music streaming website. Is that a good explanation? So Spotify also collects that information. Many of the applications that people use on their smartphones these days have GPS information, are able to identify where exactly you are. So even though it may not seem important, it may not be a messaging service, it may not be a banking service, something that you think a trafficker or a victim would use, it may still be able to give you the information you need about people's whereabouts, simply because the operation of that application on the phone causes the service to identify where that person is when they're using the application. So if all else fails, if you don't have text messages, if you don't have any other phone records or other ways to identify where that person might be, but you do have a phone or other applications, do some research and see if those applications are location based, because they can be a good alternative. Oh no. Okay. Certainly not going to make you sit through this whole thing again. Another question that Rick was asking about the banks, or about banking and using credit cards. Baru, can you pay for Baru using credit card? Is it Baru? Am I pronouncing it right? Badu, I'm sorry, Badu. No wonder everyone looked at me like I was crazy. Do you use credit card? Do people use credit cards to sign up for Badu? Give me just a sec.
There are two members in Badu. They are ordinary member, but if they want to lift you up, there's a premium member. Then they will ask you for your ATM number. So majorly they ask you for the 4 last digits of your ATM card to upgrade you to a premium member where you can have access to some classic babe or classic guys, because in Badu there are levels. So levels here. So the moment you give them the the credit card, your ATM card number, and you are able to pay for the premium spot, you have access to some of the facilities that ordinary member will not have access to. Okay. So you'll be able to charge, you'll be able to make call, you'll be able to do a lot of things.
So if I'm a trafficker, a sex trafficker, and I'm going to put a young girl on Badu to get dates for her, to get someone to buy her for sex, am I getting the paid membership for her, or am I getting the free membership?
What happened with good girls?
Right.
So,
okay. I'm not going to touch that one. Yeah. It's another training.
Excuse me, please. Excuse me, please. The girls, like I said yesterday, the Nigerian issue we have here is not the pimp issue.
Right.
The girls in Badu, they are not being trafficked. They are there on their own. Most of them are adults. They are there on their own. What we have in Nigeria here is the issue of the madam taking on the 8 girls to Europe and within Nigeria and all that. So the girls in Badu, they are not being trafficked.
So the madam won't put girls on Badu?
No.
Interesting.
Because it's
okay,
kind of hidden, it's done on the ground. So the Badu girls, they are not being trafficked. I want to make that correction, please.
Okay, no, I'm glad that you did, because
They are not.
It's just sex, it's just prostitution.
Yes, and this clarification is very important, please.
Yes, it is very important.
They don't pay tax, but then they operate like that. They sell sex. But in Europe or in America, they have a particular place where they go and they pay tax. Government collects tax from them. That's it. To Badu. In terms of Badu, it's possible, but then
to use, right.
Is a new.
It can happen. A madam can take a victim to Badu. A madam can do it. That is what she is.
That's
so
exactly
it's
right.
a new trend. It can happen.
Because then you have a whole big group of available people to sell sex to, right? You've put this woman on Badu, and now it's not just like going to a hotel bar and you only have who's in the hotel. Now you have hundreds, maybe thousands of people available all at the same time.
So just so you know, on Backpage that we were talking about yesterday, a lot of those girls that are on Backpage are being trafficked. They're not there doing their own thing. So it's not, it wouldn't surprise me if you guys had the same thing in Badu.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's so many similarities in every other way that I wouldn't be surprised, like Rich said, if it's happening or if it's not already, that it will be very soon. So one of the things you might want to think about when you're requesting records is requesting records from Badu also. That might give you some information about whose credit card was used for payments. If you've got a madame and she wants to get the most money for each of her girls for each time they have sex, it probably makes sense for her to get them that premium membership, right? Because then they're going to have access to the best guys, and the best guys are going to pay the best money. Okay, so now we have a madame who's used her ATM card to sign up the girls on Badu. So we send a request to Badu. We say, you know, who used or who paid for this ad? Give me their credit card information. We take the credit card information. We get the bank records for the associated, or the credit card records associated with that bank card. And now we know who it was that was posting those ads online. So as you continue to see this more and more, keep that in mind. Is something that you want to do. In addition, Badu may be able to give you the profile. I don't know if profile is the right word. Is profile someone's account? It may be able to give you the account or the profile information. Right. Yeah. And then you probably can see the communication. I don't know Badu well. This is the first I've ever heard of it. But I'm guessing you can probably see the communication between different users also. So that will tell you maybe not only who created the account, but how often that account is being used, what kind of agreement or information is being provided back and forth between the users, and who is the sex buyer on the other side. Who's the man that the trafficking victim was sold to? And what is his role, if any, in the trafficking scheme? Okay, now we have to figure out how to get us back to where we're supposed to be here. All right, so any questions on any of that? I'm going to transition a little bit here.
Not a question, it's a contribution.
Sorry, I'm having a hard time.
It's a contribution. It's not only Badu that are doing this thing, even WhatsApp.
Okay.
They create a group in WhatsApp where girls that are willing, their nude pictures, they send it. I've seen somebody's email that young girls that are available there, they send their nude pictures to them, then with their address, contact phone numbers, then any man that is interested, you contact them. Right. So it's not only Badu, you have it in WhatsApp, even Facebook. Some create a group on Facebook. I come across a woman that sent her nude pictures. So she wanted to send it to that particular WhatsApp group. She now sent it to somebody else. So it happened. Let's, as investigators and prosecutors, let's expose ourselves to all this area. It's not only Badu.
Right.
Even in WhatsApp, Facebook.
Right, and that you make a really good point.
Social media generally.
For the juvenile trafficking cases in the United States, I would venture to say recruitment happens at least 50% of the time through Facebook and Instagram. It happens that way here too, huh? Yeah, so you want to make sure that you're subpoenaing all those records. And does your Facebook here, this might be a foolish question, does your Facebook here have Messenger? Can you chat with people on Facebook? Okay, so you want to make sure when you're requesting your records that you're getting those records also, because that'll give you the actual nature of the conversation. Often the actual recruitment will be sent to you on paper. You'll be able to see the information. Sometimes they'll agree to meet and then they have the conversation in person if it's a more sophisticated trafficker, but you want to make sure you ask Facebook for that part of the records in addition to the things that they would ordinarily send to you. Yes?
To ask, where mine is, I wanted to find out, maybe you have a case in court. I'm talking of tracking now. Have a case in court, the defendant cannot be found anywhere. You make necessary arrangements with NIA. They're able to give you information, especially as to various phone numbers, various numbers that the trafficker, make contact with. And yet you are not being able to trace that person.
Yep.
How do you trace the person to the exact location where the defendant is? Because in this case, you gathered all your evidence, everything is just to get the defendant.
We have that problem sometimes also. This might be a question for the to answer. Trying to locate defendants. I'll give you an example. I have a case, not even a trafficking case, but another type of case where, I spent a year plus working on this case every day. My investigator spent a ton of time working on it. We really geared up for trial, ready to go, have our exhibits, have everything together. We got it filed. We had 3 addresses. One we were certain the defendant was living at. We showed up there to arrest him, not there. So we're like, okay, I'm sure it's just one of the other 2 addresses. We go to the other 2 addresses, neither one. That was about 9 months ago, and we've still not found him. So it happens to us too, don't feel badly, but I'm gonna have Rich give some information about the best ways to handle it and what you can do to do your best job.
What we do more times than not is what you were saying with cell phones. We find most of our people through their phones, because sometimes, again, it goes back to the money part of it for me, but a lot of times when people send money through MSBs, so you go in there, you give them your name, your ID, sometimes they'll lie about their address or whatnot, but the one thing that they usually put down on the records that's good is their telephone number, because if for whatever reason something happens to the money, they want to be able to have them call them. So their phone, we find phone numbers that are good on our records a lot, and we'll write orders to track their phones. So we'll find them that way, see where they're picking money up. There's other things we have in the U.S., so we have the ability, if you know what vehicle they're driving, we have cameras all over the place that pick up people's license plates, so we can find out where their cars are parked in the middle of the night, so we know where they're sleeping. We know if in the U.S., if somebody's, I don't know what the equivalent, if there's like an equivalent of a welfare system or whatnot, but in the United States, if somebody's homeless, for example, and they can't make enough money, or we'll give them benefits, we find out what offices they're picking up their benefits at, so it gives you an idea of where they're living. But more times than not, it's usually through cell phone stuff.
Another way of locating, especially if a criminal street gang is involved, they have defined areas, turfs. And if you know which gang member is being involved, then that activity is going to occur within that geographical area. And I don't know if the cults have similar areas, but if you can identify what areas they're in, that will give you a good range where you can locate the activity, because they have to do it within that area. And sometimes if you have competing human traffickers, they're going to define, this is my area, this is my zone of trafficking, that one's yours. So identifying who's involved can give you that area.
Does that answer your question a little bit? Kind of. It doesn't really give you the answer you're looking for, I know. Yeah. Even if the only problem is that you haven't been able to find the defendant?
That is if you're not being able to find the defendant. Most times, even to come to court for the first time.
Right.
Because sometimes, like in NAPTIP, where defendants, they go on administrative bail, you are required to produce the defendant in court. That is you, the prosecutor. You are required to produce the defendant in court, where the defendant cannot be produced, at least for the first time. If you are able to produce the defendant in court, the defendant is arraigned, takes he or her plea, then it now becomes the duty of court.
Yeah,
but where you are not able to do it because you cannot find the defendant to the location, that's why I asked that sometimes some of these our intelligence, like the NIA, maybe they can avail you with various phone numbers, but Most times that is not even enough. Tracing them to the exact location where the defendant is.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I think the answer is largely that this is something we all struggle with and that there's no perfect solution. It's just one of the things that comes with the territory. We do the best we can. We go out every day, we work hard, we research, we look, we try again, but that there's no simple fix. That said, the suggestions my colleagues made, are certainly things to try, worth trying. How long, if you file a case, how long is it before a court will shut out the case if you don't have the defendant? It's in the rules of court. Okay, interesting.
I have a question. Will the court give you more time if you can show the court you've used diligent efforts to try to find the defendant? And so you may have to do that and be prepared to show and bring an investigator as to what diligent efforts have been made, and especially in these cases where the defendants move around. And so if you can show that to the court should be giving you more time. You see, our investigation is ongoing. We think he's here. We've sent agents there. We're looking for him now. And you continue that. The court, hopefully, will exercise its discretion given all that information and give you more time. But that's something you may have to build into your case.
I think that boils down to the temperament of the judge. That is why they were talking about training of the judiciary. Right. Because if the judiciary are not trained to recognize that human trafficking cases are special cases that may require this, they will not be able, because some judges are quite temperamental and they'll just throw out the charge. Immediately they notice anything going wrong. But the ones that have gone through this kind of awareness and training, they are more amenable to granting time for these investigations to go through.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Sometimes too, the court matters, especially when you're filing cases at the Federal High Court. You have to file your charge with an affidavit stating that you have concluded all investigation and you're ready to go on with the matter. So in such situations, when you come back to the court and you're giving excuses, it seems as if you were not prepared in the first place, and most judges usually frown at that.
Okay, so you help us with identifying something that can be a challenge. It's a barrier to us building and then being able to actually prosecute and get a conviction on himself. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about other barriers, the things that you all see as barriers to your success in getting a conviction and a sentence in the process. We heard the speakers on Monday talk about a few of them, a few of the most common barriers, but I'd like to see if there's anything that anyone specifically in this smaller environment would like to add, things that they find, or that you find you and your colleagues struggle with on a routine basis in building your cases. So anyone who wants to start, we'll spend some time getting some ideas and then we'll talk about them. No? No one has any trouble? Any trouble?
One of such cases is usually having medical records involving child exploitation. If you go to the hospitals, the doctor that signs the record knows he or she will be the one to appear in the court. So often some of them are reluctant. There's a case we had that until we had to subpoena the doctor before he had to come. So some of them are reluctant in giving us medical records to use in our for witness.
Okay, so enforcement of the subpoenas that you're saying that are being served on.
Yes, because some of them don't want to appear in court.
So the doctor doesn't want to have to come to court and talk about the records.
Yes, so they will be there trying to make it a bit difficult until we prevail in some cases.
That makes sense. I just want to take a quick pause. I noticed some of you were filling out the the evaluations that were passed out. If I could just ask everyone to set that aside for now, there'll be plenty of time before or after lunch or at the end of the day to fill it out. It's important. We definitely want you to do it, but I just want to make sure we're showing respect to all of our colleagues who are sharing and engaging by giving them our full attention. So that's a great witness participation or witness testimony, witness cooperation is definitely a challenge. Is there anything else that anybody wants to share?
Hello, good morning everybody. I am not an investigator, but I'm a public enlightenment officer. But I've been around in some cases where they brought suspects and victims. And during the interview, the suspects claim they don't speak any language anybody can understand. And they just don't speak any language anybody can understand. So they make it very difficult for the investigation to be carried out.
Okay.
So we've had cases like that sometimes.
Do suspects here have the right, what we call the right to remain silent? Do they have to speak to you? Yes. They do?
They do.
Okay. Yeah, so that's very different in the United States. In the United States, the first thing a police officer has to tell a suspect before he brings him to the police station and it sits him down and asks him questions or her questions is to tell them they don't have to talk to you.
Yeah.
You do that. Oh, so okay. Right. So why do they pretend they don't speak the language instead of just saying, no, I don't want to talk to you?
They're scared and frustrated, and from my personal experience, a lot of them don't even know what trafficking is. So most times when you tell them this is a case of and they're looking at you, what's going on? I shared that with you yesterday. I just helped my friend. I was just trying to give her a better life. So they don't even understand. So usually they are scared and they start to speaking English and they say, oh, I don't understand. They don't really understand.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. What other challenges do we have? I keep forgetting to actually hand people the microphone.
Yeah, I want to share a scenario that happened in Kano in 2011. We have a case of a minor who was deaf and dumb, and the trafficker actually molested the child in Nigeria before taking him across to Nigeria, probably for homosexual activities. So when they were being apprehended and sent back to us, we have a problem because we can relate with the trafficker, but the victim was becoming a problem because he's deaf and dumb, and some of us don't understand sign language. So, we just have to employ somebody to come and interpret in sign for the child so that you'll be able to understand what is happening and why he was being brought back from Nigeria where he was and what NAPTIP intend to do to him. So in the process of narrating and showing sign, the boy was, maybe because of the trauma he had gone through, the boy was very, very stiff-necked. He don't want to listen, he doesn't want to do anything. So it took us a lot of time to persuade him, give him food, show him love. At the end of the day, he was now using sign to report to the person who brought. And we find out later that the child was molested in Nigeria by the trafficker. His friend, who he has in Ninja, when he spoke to the friend about that boy he was molesting, the friend who was interested. So what he did was to transfer that same boy who was less than 10 years to his friend in Ninja before they were being caught. So we have problem at times when you have cases of disability, especially when the victims are disabled, how to be able to get their statement, how to be able to call them out of their mood, so to share what their experience with us. So it was a very great problem getting the boy.
So it sounds like what you're describing, at least in part, is building rapport with your victim, getting to develop a trusted relationship with your victim. No? Oh, okay. Special needs. Okay. So that's also an issue of needing resources, right? What you really need was somebody who can provide that victim with the services they need to be able to communicate with you effectively and to feel like all of their needs are being met. Okay, very good.
Another problem I notice is when a suspect has been granted administrative bail, and even a victim, for them to come to court is always a problem. There was a case that the suspect was released on administrative bail because if you don't do that, they will start suing for fundamental infringement of their fundamental human right. This man was released, only for him to appear in court become a problem. The address he gave, they went to that place, they couldn't trace that man. Even the wife too, whether they relocated from Abuja. In fact, I felt for the investigator that was investigating that case. She go to Lagos on several occasions to go and look for this man. She didn't see the man, even the wife. And on the aspect of the victim too, after reuniting them with their parents, for them to come and testify in court is a problem. And in some instances, this case, as time goes on, they will just strike the case out. They will say, this person wants to help me, now you want me to testify against this person in court. And at the end of the day, nothing will just lose that case.
So another issue of getting your witnesses to court. So that's something to keep in mind with when you're having problems with something like getting your witnesses to court, is thinking about how much of your case you can prove using some of the things we've talked about is on the paper trail list up there. The different types of records that you can request that might keep you from having to get that witness in Lagos to court in Abuja. You can just request the records and use the documents, or use the person from the bank who might be more accustomed to coming to court to testify in cases.
And in some cases, you discover that victims of human trafficking is stigmatic in some societies. And so what they do is that some of them, except you want to give them some coverage where they will not appear in the open court. Otherwise, they don't want to testify because you suffer a lot of isolation from your community, from your society, from people generally, especially if you are identified as a victim of human trafficking. Right. So that is an issue.
Sure, it's a big issue. What are some ways you think that, or at least what do you think the best way might be for us to eliminate that stigma? Awareness, exactly. That's a lot of why the awareness is so important, because the more we can help everybody, not just lawyers or investigators or judges, but help everybody to understand what human trafficking is and to understand that the victims are truly victims, the more that we can help to erase that stigma that's causing the problems for the victims in their lives, and in turn causing the problems for us and ours.
Excuse me. I want to ask a question. Now, in your own society in America, in terms of the victim, how do you reunite them? After the court case and the victim needs to be reunited, what do you do in terms to prevent just what the question was just asked now? Yes, how do you rehabilitate them?
A number of things. So it mostly depends on what that particular victim needs. Adults and children will be a little bit different. Victims who have very good family structure will be different than the victims who might be an orphan or live in a foster home or with a distant relative. So it depends. Some victims have substance abuse problems, use drugs, use alcohol because of the trauma that they've been subject to, or because the trafficker used drugs or alcohol as a way to control the victim. So it'll usually be some combination of services. It will be counseling and or drug or alcohol treatment, if that's appropriate. It will be making sure they have safe housing. So for a child, ideally, that would be a foster home or a group home that has trauma-informed practices, that's familiar with children who have been sexually exploited. For an adult, it's the same thing. The adult wants to be in a shelter or in a therapeutic environment. We can help facilitate that. Otherwise, we'll help them get back up on their feet independently. I've had cases where I've had juvenile victims who were not in school because they were being trafficked. So we help those victims to finish their high school education and start college courses. Or employment. There's services, organizations in the United States that will help people to work on their resume and learn how to write a cover letter and to apply for jobs and to go to an interview. We can set victims up with that kind of service, adult victims, so that they can start to make a living by doing something that's not exploitative and be able to pay for themselves and to have a home where they're safe and things like that. The provision of services to victims is driven almost entirely by what that victim wants or what they feel that they need. If I have a victim who says, college is for me, I'm not going to insist that that person start college courses because it's about what the victim wants. But if that's what they want, then that's what we'll help them do.
So as a victim, and maybe she demands that she needs a change of identity, to move from a state to the other state. Is it possible?
Yeah. Okay. Possible here too, I'm guessing, since you asked. Yeah? Okay. Do you use that often? No? Is it difficult to facilitate? Is it hard to get a victim or witness moved?
Yes, I want to say that's in line with the suggestion I wanted to make. We have a national policy on the protection and assistance to trafficked persons, 2008, and there is a provision there for informant protection, victim protection. Actually, that has not really been working very well because looking at the conditions involved, and that's where I think you can help us out now to make suggestions on how to have that workable. At what level can we begin to operate or see to the implementation of that? In fact, that boils down to what my colleague said. A doctor that is not willing to come and testify, an informant that is giving you an information on the phone and he says, I don't want to mention my name and all that because of fear of reprisal attack. So that's what the policy is suggesting, that, okay, there could be informant protection. So how can we have informant protection system possible? Another side to it is from that same policy, he stated that a victim is not supposed to spend more than 6 weeks at the shelter. Right. And then during that period of 6 weeks, sometimes activities are not concluded. Of course, you can actually agree that the child can be moved because our shelters are closed shelter. They can be moved to open shelter where they can do things. But even at that, you find out that the security system or the safety arrangement in such safe open shelters are not really safe enough for them. So how can we have a sustainable informant protection system that will solve a lot of problems about people coming out to give information and to testify in courts?
So one of the strongest ways that we're able to do that in the United States is that we have a law that makes it a crime to intimidate a witness, to try to keep a witness from coming to court. There's a variety of other types of intimidation that it spells out more specifically, or kinds of interference that it spells out more specifically. And judges take it very, very seriously. So if I have a human trafficking case, for example, and I find out that the defendant's brother, this has happened to me, the defendant's brother is calling the victim, don't go to court, don't go to court, I'll pay you, don't go to court. I file a new case, or we call amend the current case to add a violation of the code section, the law, that makes it a crime to try to dissuade a witness from going to court.
Can witnesses testify using an alias in court? Can they testify using an alias, a different name in court, to protect them? That is a very effective tool where everyone can agree, including the court, that this witness will be known as John Doe for purposes, and everybody knows. And so that's a very effective tool. And if you can tell witnesses beforehand, we'll protect you, and one of the things that we will do is allow you to testify under an alias, that might make them less reluctant to testify. And then thereafter, then you can go ahead and then go witness protection and take other steps. but there may be means that can be used to try to protect the identity and get that witness ready to testify in court. And you can use whatever your courts will allow you to.
Coming, when the victim comes in, even if you have a change of name, they say you can't have a change of face. So she comes and everybody knows that this is the person talking. And then she steps out after this thing, probably. So what happens to that victim after? So we still have a problem with that. Thank you. Because even in our policy too, in our policies, from the point of arrests and rescue to the point of prosecution and counseling, the identities of victims are protected. Even when you are reporting in news, if you have any reason to report, you change their names and all that. So those things are in place, but we still have that issue of informal protection challenge.
Do you have a law like that, which I described we have in the United States, that makes it illegal to intimidate or to scare or bother a witness?
That's part of what the policy suggests. Yes, that's still part of it, but the enforcement of that, for instance, Mr. Bello knows about this case. I handled a case in Lagos. Okay, he even started the case. I think he was the IPO in the case. And then the suspect that was arrested, because of the relationship they have, a witness that came to testify in that particular case, immediately after the suspect was released on bail, he went, framed up an allegation, and went with a policeman, got this man arrested, and took him to prisons. Well, much later, when we got to hear about it, of course, even the same woman jumped bail. After she was freed, she had to jump, so we had to go rearrest her. And then, but after that, now 7 years, a conviction has been secured for her, 7 years. But then, what happens after the 7 years? What happens, because that very person that, the man that, the brother, the younger brother that testified against her because of the level of damage that she inflicted on her victim, is still a member of that family, and she's still living where she is. So what happens thereafter? And then how will it affect the next person who wants to come to testify?
Stay away from junction. This person must stay away from that person and not get within a mile, 2 miles, or some distance. If the judge knows that type of junction to protect the witnesses, utilize them as an method. Use the court and use the court's power to protect that witness's safety and security.
Yeah, I want to just clarify what we have provisions in the Administration of Criminal Justice Act.
Can I ask you to speak up just a bit? So
we have the provision in the Administration of Criminal Justice Act that deals with witness protection. And even our Trafficking in Persons Act, it has provisions that deals with witness protection. But we have not had cause to actually do that. And I think the law is there. If there's need for us to actually do that, the law is there and it provides for ways that we can do it. I think it can be done.
Okay. All right. Any other routine challenges anybody wants to share before we...
This is for the lawyers. I'm sure they are aware of. I don't know if it's peculiar to the US. A suspect, when arrested, comes, give a statement. And when he goes to court, claims that that statement is not his or hers. And they now start having to deliberate on that. He says he or she was not the one who wrote that statement. I don't know if people they have similar issues in US. As if it's got to under duress, or he was not or she was not the one who wrote that statement.
I had two statements to present. So the first, as I was trying to present the statement, the lawyer, the counsel of the defendant, made a swift move to the defendant in the box, whispered something to, before the judge could notice it, he had whispered. So the judge now had to call into order. So as I was trying to present that statement, he raised an objection. The defendant now said it was not her statement, that she was not the one that made, just like he said. And the judge now said, I did not give a good foundation of the matter. I lost that statement. It was the second statement that we now use to prosecute that case. And we got a conclusion on it. Okay.
But if they sign them two under penalty of perjury, what you can do is you can go to the witness and say, witness, is this your signature? Yes. And you signed it under penalty of perjury this time? Yes. You can go to the other statement. Witness, is this your signature? Yes. And you sign it under penalty of perjury. So if they deny it, then you say, were you lying then, or are you lying now? And in any event, they've committed perjury. So they better come with the truth. That is a good technique.
Right, and not only that, but you'll ideally, from doing some of the other things we talked about today, have evidence that will corroborate the statement that is actually true. So you can show all of the, you can say all of these other pieces of evidence show that this statement is true and show that this one is false. The victim says in the false statement that she was in Lagos, not in Abuja where the trafficking was. But I show on her cell phone that her cell phone that was with that she carries always was in Abuja. So I know she was in Abuja. Or the witness at the hotel recognized her on that day in Abuja. Other ways to show which statement is true and which statement is not. The other thing to consider is video recording and audio recording your interviews with everyone.
Yes.
As a matter of practice in the United States, we record all of our interviews. It does two things. First, it helps you to preserve the information, to preserve the interview, so that you don't have to worry about taking notes and you can really pay attention to the conversation that you're having. It also prevents witnesses from being able to accuse the investigator or the attorney of doing something improper or of saying, no, I didn't say that. That officer made it up.
Excuse me, please. In courts, when there's a disagreement, at the point of tendering the defendant's statement, and he goes on to say that it was not his statement, it was not made voluntarily. So when there's a disagreement to the voluntariness of that statement, there's what we call by our law trial within trial. The trial within trial will come up, and evidence will be called, and witnesses will be called to adduce to the fact that, yes, when you made the statement, it was voluntarily. Where did you make this statement? Where this happened, and that, all those will happen. If at the end of the day, it was determined that, yes, you made this statement voluntarily, and at this point you're lying, the trial goes on.
Yeah. Yep.
And the statement will be adduced, will be taken in evidence. Yeah.
One of the things that you may want to do is have a witness to the statement if they don't have their attorney. If they have their attorney present, you can always ask them if their attorney was present when they made that statement and they were advised of their rights and they signed it. If they don't, you may have another witness, and often it can be an investigator, and you're going to have that investigator write a report about the circumstances under which that statement was taken and how rights were given prior to making the statement, how the person agreed, and you may have to call that witness then to impeach that statement that's now being retracted. So that's another method, but you always, if you can, have video or audio recording as well to back it up. If not, a witness who will be able to testify about the circumstances under which that statement was made. And often that can be an investigator. You may have to call them into your trial to impeach that testimony.
And even on a more basic level, if you're an investigator or an attorney and you're conducting an interview, it's always ideal to, if like Tony said, if you're not recording it, to have two people, because it's much easier for someone to accuse one person of not telling the truth than to accuse two people of not telling the truth. So if a victim or witness or whoever it is takes a stand and says, I didn't tell the officer that. Okay, maybe the officer is lying, maybe the witness is lying. Yeah, a judge could find either one. If a victim says, no, that officer is lying and that officer is lying, they're lying about the same thing, they were both wrong and I'm right, it's a lot less of a believable story that they're both wrong and the witness is right. Okay, anything else? All right, so I had a few that I put together based on the conversations I've had with you and the things that were discussed. We've covered a lot of them, but I'm just going to run through quickly and fill in the gaps. Okay, so victim cooperation or reliability. You want to make sure you're using the trauma-informed, victim-centered approach. Food, water, clothing, housing, we covered all of those things. The interview techniques or the soft room that I described before are always helpful. Easing burden of the court process. This is something I do in every one of my cases. Going to court isn't fun for anyone. I mean, sometimes it's not even fun for you as a lawyer to go, let alone to bring a child or to bring a victim or to bring a witness who's had to travel from wherever. So particularly with victims, though, I will take the victim to court before they have to go to court for the case and show them around the courthouse, sometimes let them meet a judge, see what a judge is, who a judge is, what they look like. I take them into a courtroom and I have them sit on the witness stand where they'll have to sit to testify so they can see how it feels to sit there, what it looks like to look out into the crowd. And I do other things like that to try to make them feel more comfortable so that when they're coming in to testify, that's not the first time they've seen the inside of a courtroom. And that's also a good time for us to have a discussion about any questions or concerns that they might have about testifying, about a courtroom, I get asked all the time, for example, where is the trafficker going to sit? How close are we going to be to each other when I'm in court? So when I take the victim to the court, I can show her, him, you're going to sit here and the trafficker is going to sit there. And we can talk about some of the ways that they can be more comfortable when they're in court, despite the fact that the trafficker is there. You know, I'll suggest to the victim, you don't have to look at the trafficker. That person has a right to be there. Doesn't have a right to eye contact with you. Look at me. We'll look at each other, we'll smile, we'll know we're in this together. And we can practice in the courtroom when nobody's there, practice asking questions and keeping eye contact, all sorts of things like that. Also in the United States, victims of crime of certain crimes are entitled to have what we call a support person present with them on the witness stand when they testify. So that law allows the victim to select a person of their choosing and ask that that person be permitted to sit with them in court. That person cannot talk to the judge, cannot talk to the witness, but they can sit there, they can hold hands, they can link arms, and they can have eye contact, and that way that victim knows that there's someone right there with them. Makes them feel a bit safer, maybe a bit more comfortable. It might be a parent, someone who they're very comfortable with, who they know is always protecting them, or a counselor if that rapport and trust has been built. So that's something I make sure to facilitate, to let the victims know and to get them thinking early on about who that person might be for them. And then also when I have a victim testifying, I make sure that I stack the room with familiar faces. In the United States, courtrooms are open to the public, with very rare exception. So often there'll be members of the defendant's family, or there'll be other people who are there because they're waiting for something happening in the courtroom afterwards. And the more unfamiliar faces there are in the courtroom, the scarier the testimony is for that victim. So I make sure I have plenty of security law enforcement officers wearing their uniforms in the courtroom, in addition to the ones who are already assigned there for their job, so that the victim knows this trafficker isn't going to get me right now. not going to touch me. He's not going to take me away because I see all of these law enforcement officers who are here to protect me. In addition, I'll have the counselor or anybody else in the victim's family come to court and sit in different spots in the audience so that if that victim and I lose eye contact and the victim looks into the audience, there's familiar faces all throughout. So that victim knows that between the security and the familiar faces that he or she is safe and supported while they're giving that testimony.
One of the advantages of having a jury is that the prosecution gets to sit closest to the jury. And the witness stands right next to the jury. Because every witness that takes a stand is that the jury. And they'll feel protection from the jury. They'll feel protection from the jury itself, being so close to the community when they're giving their testimony. And that's a built-in comfort often. And you'll tell every witness, often before you come in, we'll give them a tour of the courtroom. Say, when you testify, this is where you're going to be sitting. This is where the jury is going to be sitting. This is where the judge is going to be. And the defendant is going to be on the other side of defense counsel, and that eases a lot of their tension. So maybe if you can tell them that they're going to be testifying closer to the judge, away from the perpetrator, the defendant, and make them a little bit more comfortable if they have a familiarity about the courtroom and how it's set up and how there'll be security and how they'll be protected, they'll be less reluctant as well. And so take that as an opportunity before trial to tell them how the trial will work, where they're going to be sitting, who they're going to be sitting next to, and then what happens after they leave court. And I think that will ease a lot of the tensions and the reluctance to having witnesses testify.
Okay, so then finally, consistent and reliable contact. Like we've discussed, it's important for there to be that connection, that bond between the victim and the counselor, the victim and the attorney, the victim and the investigator, your case team. And for many of these victims, they were vulnerable because they've not had a good support system or a good support person in their lives. There may not be anybody who's ever been there for them all the time, who they feel that they can trust, who they feel is on their side, who they feel is going to meet their needs. So you want to make sure that you show them that you can and will be that person, not only for the case, and not only until the case is over, but for as long as they need you to be that person. So often that means reliable and ongoing contact with them, and most importantly, doing exactly what you say you're going to do. You know, these are individuals who have been exploited. People have not done right by them. So if you say, I'm going to be here on this day to visit you, you better be there on that day to visit that victim, because if you're not, you go in the same category as everybody else who they can't trust, who doesn't do right by them, and who they can't rely on for anything. Partnership with non-governmental organizations or service providers. I know NAPTIP is a little bit different in the sense that you have all of that in-house, but something to think about, you know, always if there's unusual resources that you need, something like a sign language interpreter, to look outside to other kinds of organizations. Building the case that can withstand the loss of the victim or the lack of victim credibility. We talked a lot about that. The more holistic approach, including your financial crimes, your money laundering, your tax crimes, so that even if you have the challenge that many of you discussed of getting your witnesses to court, you can still have a case based on some of the documentation and the record evidence instead. Remote testimony. There's, and I should have mentioned this before when you were asking about the safety of the victim. There's a law in the United States, it's new, that allows minor victims of human trafficking to testify remotely, like by camera, under certain circumstances. So that allows them to avoid the trafficker altogether, at least for the purposes of sitting across from them in court. I don't know if there's anything here like that for other crimes maybe. Are there any circumstances where somebody can testify remotely by phone or by video? Video, okay. So similar, if that's something you could use with the trafficking victim, that might be something to consider. And then witness protection and community awareness, like we talked about, the stigma will be alleviated a bit by the community awareness, and the witness protection might help you get your victims to court. Witness cooperation more generally, the doctor that was mentioned over there who doesn't want to come to court, or other, maybe someone from the bank or the neighbor or the hotel. You want to make sure you're addressing compensation and convenience. You make a very small amount of money in the United States to be a witness, so that's never going to be the incentive, the motivation to come to court, but we make sure that there's no additional expenditure. We pay for your travel to court, we pay for your parking at court, we pay for your lunch when you're at court, so that the victim doesn't see, or the witness doesn't feel any additional burden on them to come to court. In convenience, we do something that's called being on call, which means if I subpoena you to court as a witness, rather than making you take a day off of work to come sit and wait for your turn to testify, if I trust you and you trust me, we have a relationship, I will give you an on-call agreement, which means I agree to let you go to work or to take care of your family, to do whatever you need to do during the day, and you agree that you'll come to court without any further subpoena or court order within 2 hours of when I call you, or within 6 hours of when I call you. So that way the witness can continue to go about their business, doing whatever they need to do, not being impacted by my case, and I know they'll be there when I need them. Fact finder, understanding, and perception. So in your case here in Nigeria, we're talking about the judge, right? In the United States, our fact finder is going to be the jury. Community education. Judges, at the end of the day, are people. So sure, training a judge to be a judge in a human trafficking case is great. We should be doing that. But they also are out in the community the same way the rest of us are. So that community awareness, that broader education about human trafficking will ultimately reach these judges as well. The judicial training we discussed, it, legislative changes. So very recently, about a year ago in the United States,